I'm Jo Wright, and this is the Coaching Culture Podcast, where we discuss how to make work better. Hello and welcome to the Coaching Culture Podcast, and today I'm joined by a wonderful human being, a long-time friend, he's laughing already, and the owner of a fabulously named company called Bizjuicer, and this is the wonderful human being that is Andy Goram. So Andy, welcome to today.
Well, this is a long time coming, Jo. It's fabulous to be here today. And yes, I do have a weird company name in Bizjuicer, but what do you expect from an ex-marketer? You're always going to overthink something like that.
Well, I want to ask you lots of questions today because you've got a fabulously named company called Bizjuicer. You've got a even more entertainingly named podcast. You're the host of the podcast called Sticky from the Inside. I don't know where you get these from, but I think we need to explore further because actually what you're all about is culture and employee engagement and experiences. So I'd love you to share a little bit more about yourself and your story, and definitely the names behind all this creativity that you bring to the party.
Well, let's get all the awful names out of the way first, right? Let's get those out of the way. So Bizjuicer was nothing more than thinking about all the latent great stuff that lies dormant in a lot of your employees because you've never asked them for it or you've never switched them on enough to kind of get it out of them, right? So Bizjuicer was nothing more than saying, oh, we give that business a good squeeze, we can get some more great stuff out of it, just like you would with a good orange, right? Get some good juice out of it. And then sticky from the inside. This is all awful, isn't it? I mean, the more I say it, the more I can understand why people go, really? What? Well, sticky from the inside.
The more
very,
people
very
go,
similar,
I've got to listen to this.
The sticky from the inside was, I think, for me, even simpler because it's really about retention. It's about retaining your talent, and it's still about employee engagement and culture and human leadership. So for me, it's about looking at retention from the inside out of a business. And, you know, my simple little word for retention is sticky, right? People stick about, customers stick about. And so sticky from the inside is about focusing on retention and engagement by, I don't know, talking to people. I'm very lucky. I get to talk to people from all over the globe, experts on all sorts of topics that are related to how you can hold on to your talent, grow it, really engage it, get amazing things from them willingly. And, you know, just those tremendous businesses that not only that you hear about or read about, that people live in and get to work in every day. And so I really enjoy that. Any chance to talk about this stuff for me, I'm grabbing it with both hands.
I know that. But so tell me what you do with Bizjuicer. Tell me what Bizjuicer offers, because I know you're so passionate with all, and a bit more about you because you've got years and years of experience in all sorts of different areas of businesses, which I guess is what brings the best of you to Bizjuicer and therefore back out to organisations.
Let's just think about the backstory. So my story is unremarkable, I think, like anybody else. You know, I had a mum and dad. I'm one of three boys, the eldest. So clearly I was wrapped in cotton wool for my whole life. You know, let's not get into that because that's my own kind of neuroses from being the eldest child. But mum and dad worked really, really hard. Got my work ethic actually from working in a bakery at the age of 16. I wanted to be a pastry chef as a kid, you know, decorate cakes. Got a part-time Saturday job at the back of Epsom Racecourse in a bakery, wanted to be a pastry chef, and really learnt my work ethic from two amazing ladies who are older ladies, Betty and Rosemary. Betty's no longer with us, bless her. But I got £1 an hour, Jo, in that first job, making cakes, learning stuff in the kitchen. But the work ethic that came from these ladies, I mean, they were there every hour God sends, but they were having so much fun while they were working.
Yeah.
And it was a great environment, right? Because I was learning stuff, I was being challenged, I had my backside kicked around the kitchen, which they loved doing, and there was so much fun.
You were paid for that, £1 an hour. You were there again.
I got paid £1, which I was very grateful for. But I found myself Easter and weekends and Christmas, I'd be volunteering to work the over the weekend shift, the 48-hour shift, just because it was amazing. And
Oh,
it didn't feel like work. It just felt tremendous. But that's where I got my work ethic from, right? Those two lovely, lovely ladies. And then I was going to be, I don't even know if you know this about me, Joe. I was going to be a barman in the American bar at the Savoy, right? I'd
that's
had
ringing a
a
bell.
lucky connection. Yeah, I'd lucky connection with the Peter Dorelli, who's I think he's still the kind of head honcho at the American bar in the
Yeah.
Savoy. And I was all set up to go and work there as a sort of early teens guy, and bottled it and went to university instead. Um, but at university, I studied hospitality. I went to California to learn my service training. Um, Came back, worked in a small hotel group, doing a few bits of sales and marketing. I'm one of the idiots in marketing who thought they were getting into advertising. That's how close attention I paid at university, right? And marketing and advertising are two very, very different things. One's definitely the poorer cousin, right? Um, but yeah, into pubs, working on great brands of the past like Firkin, and then all that kind of changed through various company mergers. Ended up going over to Burton and met you lot over in
Yep.
Allied Domec Inns at that point, and
Did.
that's where we ended up working together in pubs. That's where I made my transition, I think, from a marketer into, I had that role called the MAD director, right, which
Yeah.
was a sort of dotted line into the CEO at the time, trying to get an organization focused on the customer and experience and service and the market, and trying to generate a real intentional culture within a business, which was a complete change for me, and I loved it. Right up
Yeah.
to the point I was made redundant in that pub company. Uh, and then, having done hotels and drink, I then went and did gaming. So I've really got section fags to go from Vice's perspective, and I've got the
Yeah,
full ticket.
exactly.
So went over to gaming, went over to Gala as it was then, started in casinos, came in the centre, did marketing services in there for a time when we were really, really cash strapped. And then one day I found myself in bingo, working for Gala Bingo as the sort of marketing director for Gala Bingo. And I don't mean this in any horrible way, but I don't think anybody ever wakes up and goes, "Do you know what? My dream job is to be the marketing director for a bingo company." I don't think there are many people like that. But I got to say, Joe, 6 or so years I spent in bingo, and it was some of the greatest times in my life at work, because
Wow.
the closeness between customers and employees in a bingo club is untold. I mean,
Yeah.
the mainstay of the customers are in there 4 or 5 days a week. They're in there 3 or 4 hours a time. I mean, this is family that's going on between employees and customers. If I
Wow.
upset employees with a promotion or any work that I was doing, and I walked into a bingo club, it was not the employees that would tell me. I would be collared by the customers, and they would have
Really?
no problem telling me what I'd done wrong. It was amazing. But those 6 years were potted with many things, including we did an MBO at the end, where we bought the retail
Yeah.
clubs,
Yeah.
and we're going to set up our own kind of omni-channel offer. And I had the amazing job of hiding under a blanket whilst trying to extract myself from the owners of Gala Bingo and create a new brand, and
Yeah.
set ourselves up for that. And being part of the MBO team was incredible. But one of the things that changed my outlook on, I know, engagement, because I learned a lesson pretty quickly that I used to talk to employees in a bingo club, right, about what they do. We're running around the country trying to sell this new brand, and you'd ask them what they do, and these are the most humble people in the world. I shovel chips for a living, Andy, or I give out change for slot machines or whatever. But
Yeah.
you ever spend any time at a bingo club and you watch what these guys do? They are wandering around a club, building and forging connections between people, between
Wow.
customers who don't know each other or do know each other, and they are really creating a kind of network of people, and they are oblivious to it. They just think it's natural. And then you sit down and you talk to them about that, and you say, what you're really doing, if you really think about what you're doing, is you are, in some cases, eradicating loneliness for people. You think about the
Yeah.
target market in a bingo club. A lot of the time, the people they see in the club are all the people that they see.
Yeah.
And the more connections they have, the more friends they have, the richer their life can become.
Yeah.
And when you start to sit down and explain what you see to these employees, and they recognize that you've seen them, and they feel like they matter, they feel like they're significant somehow. I mean, the physical change in them is unbelievable. You know, the shoulders go back, the chest puffs up, the eyes
Oh,
wide open. And then you watch them doing what they're doing around the club intentionally, and the amazing stuff they were already doing is multiplied. It's tremendous,
wow,
you
that's
know.
an amazing
And
story.
I think as a marketer, I spent millions and millions of pounds in my early career trying to convince customers why you should choose me, why you should shop with me, buy my stuff,
Yep.
recommend my stuff to other people, and not very much at all on internal audience, the guys who are
Yep.
delivering the brand every day. And the minute I understood that making that emotional connection was just as important as making the emotional connection with your customers, it's a game changer. So that's a bit of backstory, but that's why I'm so passionate about the link between engagement and values and culture change, because I've practically seen it. I've been the idiot on the wrong side of the fence,
Yep.
and I've been the guy now desperately trying to pull people onto the other side, because it is so much greener on that side, and so
Yep.
many amazing things happen if you can just give it enough attention.
And you are certainly passionate about it, aren't you, Andy? I mean, like literally, you live and breathe this stuff. And you and I talked before we kind of came on air about culture change isn't easy. It's hard,
No.
but but you are going out there and sprinkling that magic of of how to get it done and making that difference out with organizations. So you know is this how you would describe your absolute purpose and passion? Is it all about that culture, employee engagement? Is it all of that, or is it more, and values as well that you talk about?
I suspect it's probably deeper. I think it's fair to say I am passionate about purpose, but I'm frustrated by the use of purpose, I think, in lots of businesses, because I think it's been completely conflated with other things. I think often you hear these frankly moronic statements like we're going to change the world with every biscuit that we sell. And it has
Yeah.
no connection to what the business actually does or what the people actually do in that business, right? And that's
Yeah.
why it gets a bad rap. I
Yeah.
think purpose. I think purpose is an incredibly important thing. I'll be honest, Joe. When I was made redundant from Gala, that's the second time, albeit in slightly different circumstances. Um, I completely lost my own personal purpose. Right?
Okay.
I Heather is my wife, who is well, she's the captain of the ship. Let's not muck about with that, right? And she is definitely my soulmate. But we made a contract with each other early doors when we got together that Heather wanted to raise the kids at home. And to do that, I would be the guy to go out and earn the wage and work hard
Yeah.
and get more wages so we could do more
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
And
Brilliant.
that became my absolute driving purpose, right? Um, when I was made redundant and I came and started to work from home and trying to think what I was going to do and reposition myself, I didn't have that purpose. I felt really quite lost, I'll be honest.
Yeah.
It seems ridiculous, but you realize that I didn't have the relationship with Megan and Max, my two lovely kids, that Heath had, because they spent all the time together. That's not that they didn't know who I was.
Yeah.
They did. And we have a lovely relationship, but it's not the same, and it wasn't the same as Heath's. And I felt like an intruder on their relationship at times and their routines. Look, I felt like I was just in the way, and I wasn't even providing any money. And money isn't the be all and end all of it. It's what we were doing with it, right? So
Yeah.
I found that sort of I would say maybe 18 months after leaving, really, really hard.
Oh,
But it made me think a lot about purpose. And the relation
yeah.
to business purpose, I think, is if you don't have that clear central drive, that North Star, whatever you want to call it, it's really easy to get lost and bimble around and achieve nothing, and
Yeah.
actually not feel very good about it either. Um, and I think this is for me where, when I think about business and the stuff I'm trying to do, I'm really trying to find the connection between the thing that drives the business and the thing that drives the people within the business. If you can find the connection between those two things, then purpose, values, culture become a tangible, useful, purposeful thing.
Yeah.
Because it's got that alignment, because you've got that connection, because it's there for a business purpose, but it's there for a personal purpose. So I'm really passionate now about trying to encourage more people to think about these links and take some steps to build it. The sad thing is that because there isn't a silver bullet answer to solving someone's culture change issues or, how to engage people, it could be seen as quite a scary thing, particularly organizational culture change, right? That can seem like an absolute amorphous thing that how on earth can I change that? And if you've got the leaders at the top of the business saying one thing, but actually doing another, well, you feel not anywhere near empowered to make a change. And I think the thing I'm trying to say to people is actually you can make a change with your culture of one, your culture. What are you trying to deliver? And how do you kind of like build that person at a time into, often we use the word tribe or whatever it is. I like to talk about it as throwing some pebbles in your own pond and trying to create those culture ripples. And the more of those that you do, the more people are going to come your way. So I'm really passionate today about trying to make culture change less scary and more sticky, right? That's what it comes down to.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And that it can feel scary for organizations. They feel like they're wielding, just such a, how do they break it down into that sort of little bite-sized chunks? And I spoke to somebody only last week who talked about how they were doing it. And exactly to your point, they started small within teams. They started with a small team rather than looking at the whole organization going, whoa, that feels scary. Started by team, by team, by team, and the ripples started moving further out, and more people started getting interested in, well, what's going on there, because they're doing something different, what's happening for us here, and it really started to make that impact. So that start small and then go everywhere kind of attitude.
I think your word impact is perfect there, because yes, changing a culture or renovating a culture, refreshing a culture absolutely takes time and commitment, but that doesn't mean you can't make immediate impact. And you absolutely can make immediate impact, right? I mean, you even just talk about in the teams stuff, one of the things I absolutely love doing, I love sitting down with businesses, like thinking about the values that drive the behavior in a business, right? And I love the things that you've got going on with your culture codes and all that. But I think the mistake a lot of businesses make when they do values is they do values, and a leadership team sits around a table and they decide what's important to them, and that's what we've got. And then they spend the rest of the time working out, well, what behavior looks like and what it doesn't look like, and then they tell everyone. Well, I don't know too many adults that like being told how to behave.
Anything,
right?
no.
So my perspective is very much, yes, okay, as a leadership team, if you've listened to the business, if you understand the culture of the business, I mean, genuinely, let's have a chat with employees on the front line and understand the things that they value, the things that they find hard, the challenges that they've got, the misalignment there is. Understand that stuff first, right? And then come back and sit around the table and go, what do we need? What does the business need if it's going to succeed? And what do the people need? And come up with that core set of values. Let's just call them those behavioral principles. But then that's only the beginning. What you want to do is you want to then take those things and you want to allow the teams in the business to interpret those. You want them to work out, well, how does that appear in the things that I do every day? How's it relevant to me? Because one of the killers of anything like values is you put them out and someone sits there in, I don't know, accounting and says, well, I have no contact with that. It's got nothing to do with me. I don't do that one. The minute you've got any kind of conversation like that going on, you've lost the game. Whereas if you take these things and say, right, my friend, how do these things show up in your day? How will I see you delivering this? And you make your own contract, you make your own charter, whatever it might be. That's the way to start to transfer ownership for behavior. And people sometimes freak out, like, oh my God, well, I have 100 150 values. And I said, no, you won't have 150 values. You'll have behavior that all leads towards your core values, but it's individual, it's relevant. And importantly for you, you've now got a chance at those people owning it because they've designed it. And I think this is what we're talking about, right? Ownership and personalization doesn't have to be a scary thing, and it can be a really liberating thing.
And I often say that the culture is made up of all those many brilliant individuals in an organization, and every person is unique, which is unique thoughts, feelings, behaviors, emotions, but all of that together, you know, it creates the culture, and the culture is absolutely the secret sauce of any organization. Get that right, and the rest will follow. Whereas, and I think it's only, how many years is it that people have been talking more, you know, more focus on culture? It's probably, what, the last 10 maybe? I don't know, or 15. It's certainly not.
I mean, it feels like it's
not that long, is it? Go on.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't feel that way. I think it's probably even more prominent now because over the last 2 or 3 years, everybody's had a good chance to have a think about what's important to them, and actually, you spend that much time at work, right? You want something good to happen. You want it to feel better than perhaps it has in the past. I think it was, Shigeo Shingo, the guy who invented Lean, effectively. Japanese manufacturing guru, right? In all of that Lean stuff, there's a lot of process. Of course, there's a lot of process, but there's an awful lot of employee connection, right? And a lot of values and cultural stuff within there. And he said something like, and I apologize for all Shingo fans when I butcher his quote, but he said something along the lines of, people spend so much of their lives at work. It's your job to add meaning to that work, or else the majority of their life is meaningless.
Yeah.
And when you stop and you think about that as a sort of phrase, sentence, I mean, that's a pretty big burden to carry around as a leader, right? Creating a meaningless society. So I think we'll just think about it. When you're doing anything in life, whether it be hobby, personal stuff, or at work, when there's that fire in you, interest in you, drive within you, enjoyment of what you're doing, everything feels a lot easier, right? It's like Neo in the Matrix in bullet time. Everything slows down around you. It's so easy to cope with, right? You combine that with being yourself. What a great place you're in, right? You can achieve amazing things. And I think that this is the sort of state we're trying to get to.
Totally. And I think fun's got to be a big part of that. You know, having humor at work is absolutely key. And there's, you know, I've worked in organisations that have been humorless, and then those that have actually been, you know, full of humour, and with that has been great employee engagement, and not just all, you know, fun time at work, but not, because you still get the job done, but you get it done with a smile on your face. And obviously that's why I wanted you today on the pod. Yeah, well, exactly. I wanted you on the podcast because whenever we have time together, we always laugh a lot, and you always end up making me, you know, I end up going, oh, my cheeks are aching, I'm laughing so much. But that's a good thing. That is a good thing. So I've listened about Betty and Rosemary, and I've listened to Gala Bingo. Where's the best cultural experiences you've had? I'm gutted you're not going to tell us that it was when you worked in the same team as me, but that's fine.
No, we had some great laughs. We did have some great laughs. And I actually think back to that time, that little core team that we had were really, really tight.
Yeah, totally.
And so I think one of the things about culture is there's lots of mini cultures everywhere, right? Yeah. There's rarely do you get a business where there's one culture that is pervasive everywhere, right? There's lots of little ones, which is why I always say to people, if you ignore this stuff, it's a bit of a folly, because you're going to have a culture whether you want it or not. So you might as well be intentional about it and make it the culture that you need, right?
Yeah.
I think, where was my best team? I would firstly say I don't think I've ever worked in the perfect culture. I just don't, as in the perfect culture for me. I just don't think I've lived that yet. Either I've got ridiculous expectations, but there's always been something. There's always been room for improvement somewhere. I'd have to say, I think where it's been most effective was probably in that original bingo exec team,
Yeah.
because we were incredibly unified behind a common goal, ultimately to get to that MBO, but to build a brand and to give it our proper personality, to try and distance, a heritage brand in this country into something else and make it our own, because we could have just changed the badge and then nothing would have changed.
Yeah.
And that would have done a disservice to the job we were trying to do, and it would not have helped us hit our numbers.
Yeah.
But as a team, you would look around that table and you trusted each other, right? And the challenge that went on around that table at times was really uncomfortable, really uncomfortable. And even soft emotional packages like me, had to get to grips with the challenge, and the conflict was needed. And actually, whilst I might have initially thought it was personal, it wasn't. It was because I was very proud of what I was doing. So anybody that would question the things I was doing or were questioning me, and they weren't. And as a team, we kind of really helped educate each other on that.
Brilliant.
And therefore, we could be really committed. And ultimately, I'm sitting here, I'm describing Patrick Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team pyramid, right? And I think, to
Trust.
me, that team at that moment in time was as close to a really strong culture that I've ever experienced. I've experienced lots of potted things in different teams,
Yeah.
but that was probably it. What I would say is, when I looked around the table months after the MBO, and I'm the only guy left from the MBO team, and new people are coming in with different ideas, different attitudes. There's less trust. It went away pretty quickly, which
Right.
ended up, being one of the causal factors of me going.
Oh, that's really interesting, isn't it? Because it sounds like you're at absolute peak trust, peak rapport, peak challenge, all of the great things that make for those high functioning, high performing teams, but then change quite quickly. But it can, can't it? It absolutely can. And then you've got to rebuild again. Um,
I think that's so true, Joe, because I think this is what makes culture such a brilliant and fascinating and fragile topic, because
yeah,
it's never done. It's
never.
never done. And there are times when you think you're in control of these things, and you turn away and you take it for granted, and it's gone,
Boom.
or it's taken a step back. And that's why I am I am boring, if nothing else, when I talk to people about how this stuff needs proper commitment, right, and long-term commitment, which I think is another reason why business suffers with it a lot today, because we've constantly got this short-term pressure and long-term vision of things like culture, and we're driven today by so much of the short-term results, whether it's to survive or to
Yeah,
get to next quarter.
yeah,
And culture change is a long-term commitment. I repeat, you can still make impact today, but often this stuff is put on the back shelf, or we'll get to it tomorrow when we sort the numbers out, because we can never get over that challenge of the need for short-term, and the for me, the desire for long-term.
yeah. Initiative-itis, I call it initiative-itis, where
Yeah. Yes.
let's look at culture this week, and then it hasn't all changed within a few weeks, so let's park it on a shelf and let's look at something else instead that might get us to that instant gratification, which is really interesting. I had a great conversation just this morning with somebody about um, sticking with it, back to your word, but sticking with
Oh,
it,
we'll have that. Very good.
sticking with it, because it's so important. Things don't just change overnight, but you can keep building on layer and layer and layer, but you've got to stick with it, um, because you will eventually reap the rewards. But ultimately, you've got to, you're dealing with so many different people, but you've just got to keep adding on the layers and layers and layers, and you will get there, and then keep hold of it. So I was talking to somebody who won our Coaching Culture of the Year award, so it was really lovely to
Mm.
hear how they'd actually really, we kind of got deeper than their application to the award ceremony, but it was like really understanding what were the real fabulous things that they'd done to achieve all that they had. So definitely stick with it. There you go, Andy. That's my gift to you.
I've got
today.
it. I've written it down. I'm nabbing that. I'm magpieing that off you. Thank you very much.
That's fine. You can have it. You can have it. That's what today's all about. Sharing the gifts.
So generous, Jo, as always.
So let's talk about the. You also work a lot with leadership teams, and obviously you've been a member of many leadership teams. So what are the best lessons that you can share that you've learned yourself that matter in organizations?
Okay. I mean, this is where mistakes are the greatest learning places, right? So I think my first one would be really almost obvious, really. Be a leader, not a parent or a buddy.
Oh, love
right?
that.
And,
Love.
Well, I know Simon Sinek goes on about how leadership is akin to parenthood, but I generally don't think your team are waking up in the morning going, "Yeah, let's go see me work, Dad." And yet that's where I spent a lot of my early career, I think, thinking that my job was to protect and look after and make everybody feel good. And don't get me wrong, there are elements of that, I think, in leadership. But I suspect where I was, if you take Kim Scott's radical candor model, I'm living my life in ruinous empathy, right? I think I'm doing all the right things. I'm looking out for them. I'm such a lovely guy. I never give anybody a tough time. And I think in myself, I'm doing the right thing because I really care about them. And I did care about them, but I can't have cared about them deeply enough to tell them like it is. And I think that's what I mean by not being a dad or a buddy. You're not there to be a buddy. It's great if you get friendship at work. It really, really is. But I think when it comes to leadership, I think you have to care deeply, but you have to challenge directly. And
that's great.
if you don't hold people to account and you don't hold things up and you don't stretch them and you don't tell them perhaps where they've just wandered off and ask them where they might do something different, I think you're letting them down. And I think I have personal regret on a number of occasions where I've had technically brilliant people work for me. I mean, brilliant people work for me. And yet culturally, they were committing murder on a daily basis and I let them get away with it. And I think about the things that I try and espouse and help businesses with today, and I cringe because I was the antithesis of a lot of the lessons that I preach, particularly having no say-do gap. I would talk this to be important, but I didn't see it through because I was probably afraid of conflict and would rather avoid that. And that was detrimental. I'll be careful of how I say this, but we did one of those sort of fireside chat things the other day with a group of, let's just say a group, shall we? And I was there to give a bit of an after dinner chat around engagement and culture and values. And at one point, I held up one of the models that I will always think is important, and it's not particularly new. It's 1997, Jo, just after Euro 96. Ken Blanchard wrote Gung Ho, I think.
Yeah.
And in Gung Ho, there is the values performance 2x2. So it tries to put people into a box, which I'm not a massive fan of, but let's just go with the model for now.
For simplicity.
So you're either for simplicity. And, here I am trying to draw it in the air for those people listening to a podcast. Brilliant. But on one axis, there's performance. So you think there's low and high performance. And when he talks about performance, he's talking about technical ability to do the job, like getting the numbers, you're a good salesperson. And on the other axis, you've got high and low in terms of your cultural delivery. Okay. And for me, the most important box, and what he sort of says, and he suggests this is what separates amazing businesses from good businesses, is that the box that's the most difficult, which is high performing, low culture, right, is the box that you have to take the firmest action with. Because often, I mean, think about it, if you're listening to this, how many times in your place of work has, let's face it, an asshole, right, been rewarded because they've got the numbers.
They've performed
the best. but actually how they treat people is like untold, or the problems that they cause, or the attitude that they have, but they're rewarded because they get the numbers. And the message behind that performance values matrix is that really amazing businesses don't settle for that. If you've got a high performer who's poor culturally and can't change, you terminate that individual. I mean, I'm not talking terminate as in that, but you get them out the business, because they are the culture killers. It will become pervasive.
Yeah.
Right. And I think I look back at my mistakes, the effect, not just on the individuals I have in mind, but their colleagues who saw them, not acting the way that I said everybody should act and getting away with it, caused them all sorts of pain, anguish, but they also switched off and they also underperformed in those areas because I had shown it wasn't important. So I think that first one is like, look, be a leader, show that stuff's important, right? Don't be the dad who's trying to look after everybody. I think the second one I've already referenced, so I won't spend too long on it, because I would genuinely say that as a leader, you need to spend as much time and energy engaging with your people as you would your customers. I also think in linked to that, it's about spending as much, or putting as much rigor into your values measurement as you would all the other financial metrics that you would have in your business. I think that's incredibly important, because when you do, and again, showing up that these things are important, then they become important to other people, right? So you start to see those things being delivered. I think the third one that's linked, and I think is really, really important, and I know we've both spoken to an amazing chap, Casper Craven, who, his book, Be More Human, is a fabulous book. And what stories that guy tells, right? What stories that guy tells. But practice being more human. I genuinely get hives if I hear the term soft skills. It winds me up. It makes it sound like somehow they're secondary to these hard skills that people talk about. And human relationship skills are not easy. We all struggle from time to time. And if they were easy, we would never have any bad boss stories. And everybody's got bad boss stories, right? But I think human skills are taken for granted. They're not easy for everyone all of the time. But you can practice and train just like you can any other skill. It's about doing it more often. And by doing it more often and feeling it more often, it becomes a bit like breathing. Right? You don't have to think about it. But how often do we? And I think sometimes on these things, you have to find your little mechanics to help you. So on my podcast, I reckon around episode 7 or 9, I mean, I've done 60 odd now, but I interviewed a guy who's got the greatest name in the world. If I was going to change my name, I would change my name to this guy. He's called Professor Zach Mercurio. I'm just going to leave that name there for you for a sec. I mean, that's a brilliant name. But what's even more brilliant is the things that he talks about. And he talks very much about mattering and significance and the importance this plays of really not just saying you value somebody, but showing how you value somebody, right, through your actions. But he tells a story in all of his research about going to see a team who could not speak highly enough of their leader. I mean, she had their back. She knew them as individuals. She stretched them. She challenged them. She supported them. I mean, they were entirely effusive. And he thought, well, I've really got to meet this lady and find out what her secret is. And he tracked her down and knocked on the office and said, listen, I mean, you must be an amazing leader, because the way your team talk about you, I mean, that's fantastic. How do you do what you do? What's your secret? And she looked at him a little embarrassed. And she reached down to the side of the desk into a tote bag and pulled out a really well-used kind of Filofax notebook.
Yeah.
And she said, look, I always knew that really understanding my people as individuals, my team as individuals, getting to know them was so important. But she said, I have a terrible memory, just an awful memory. And it's always let me down in the past. But I decided it was so important. I'm going to make intentional notes when I have conversations. So when she has a conversation with someone about their personal life or anything else going on, she would come back and she would make little notes in her book. And then the next time she was going to have a conversation, she'd reference the book. And the book was well used. And she doesn't use the book anymore, but it created a habit of really listening to what people were saying and registering it, right? So something as simple as making notes and allowing her to know when Tommy's operation had been and how was he doing, or an anniversary had cropped up, or someone had bought a new car, however trivial or massive or profound, she had a finger on it through a simple kind of habit forming process. And as a result, look at how that team talked about her. Look at how that team performed. So she's embarrassed that she's got a notebook. I'm incredibly in awe of someone finding their little mechanics. You know, it's like my daughter and son, both dyslexic, both had tough time through school and really struggle until they find their little key to make something work and make something stick. And this is what this is about. Finding ways to practice being more human, right? You shouldn't be ashamed about it. You should be congratulated because you want to try that stuff and you want to get better at it. Because if we were all better at it, life would be so much easier.
And don't you think, Andy, times are a-changing? Because we're having this conversation, you and I having these conversations with more people. It does feel like times are a-changing, and it feels like they've been changing for some time, but the pandemic definitely stuck a rocket up that changing time, to be fair, and has accelerated the not only the need for change, but the responsiveness of organisations and the recognition that actually all of this stuff that you and I talk about, and we both preach it, you know, because we're so passionate about it. I think more and more organisations are starting to wake up to it. I have one concern that actually some organisations are trying to pull their teams back to pre-pandemic ways. Like they're going,
Yep.
you're coming back whether you like it or not. And actually that doesn't feel like, that feels like a step backwards rather than a step forwards. But in general, we're having more of these conversations because I think, you know, people are recognizing more what they need from work, what they need from their meaningful work, what they need from their leaders, and actually how much it impacts the life at home. You know, I often say work life is what? It's not a separate thing. It's all one. It's life. Make it a good one.
I think that point is overlooked by lots of people, Jo, listening to you say that, because I think the lines have blurred. And I think because the workplace actually became the home place has had a lot to do with that for a large amount of time, for a large amount of people. Not everybody, because everything about this always gets talked about the people in the offices. Well, not everybody works in offices.
Yeah.
But I do think there has been a blurring. I actually think there was a complete bow wave of humanity that came through on the back of COVID, right?
Yeah.
You know, popping around the corner to make sure your neighbour was all right that you hadn't spoken to in 10 years, all of a sudden was kind of commonplace.
Yeah.
And I think we all took a bit more of a human stance on life for a bit.
Yeah.
And I think, there is a lot of businesses trying to pull everything back to the way it was because they feel comfy. I think what we experienced in terms of hybrid and remote work, if you were experiencing those things, are not what real hybrid and remote working are really like. They were a kind of, as someone said to me the other day, a hot mess of hybrid, because we were just finding it out as we went along.
Yeah.
And I think we're still trying to find out what the right way to work is. And it's still going to take individual consultation between what the business really needs to happen and how the employees can feel comfortable making that happen. Because I think people changed a lot of stuff, to balance things in their home life. And the threat of that all being taken away is very real for a lot of people. So it's no good just saying, well, we're in 3 days and we're out 2 days and these are the 3 days we're doing it. That might bring some sort of certainty, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's the right answer. And I think we've still got a long way to find the way through. But I think you're right. I think people expect more, which is why I'm really hopeful that people like you and I will get less kind of queer raised eyebrows when we talk about this stuff and the gestures of, this is all very interesting, but we'll get to it later. And actually people start to sort of realize that, like lots of other businesses, no, we need to crack on with this stuff now. And we need to continue with it.
And often, you know, it gets the results. You know, there's more and more evidence and research now that show that the positive, healthy culture, the environment where employees are, you know, delighted to work, not just happy to rock up, or they don't have a Sunday night feeling, you know, it's a great experience. They're the ones that get the results. To me, I just think it's not rocket science. It's not always easy to do. It's easy to say, but not easy to do. But I think, you know, the more and more, like you said, people like us kind of shouting about it, the differences will definitely be being made out there in a good way. I certainly get to speak to loads of people like you do who are making a difference, but then you can see where it can fall down as well, where some people just don't get it, or they just want the ROI of you know, how to be good employers, and you know, the evidence is
That's
all
such an interesting
there.
thing about ROI. It's such an interesting thing about ROI. There's a I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Barry Chapman and the Chapman Institute with the
I
Barry
am
Waymiller
indeed.
story.
Yep, I am
Yeah.
indeed. Yes,
So
I follow him.
I think that whole thing of intentionally caring for the
Yeah,
people who you're lucky enough to sort of like employ or steward or whatever. But he talks quite passionately and openly about when he's touring the world, spreading this message about what caring leadership really, really means and what it produces. He's still surprised by the number of, not always CFOs, but a lot of CFOs who put him aside at the drinks do. So tell me what's the actual ROI on this caring thing? And he sort of says, really? Wow. If we're actually having to have a conversation to work out what an ROI is for caring about somebody, I think we're having the wrong conversation. And I love
Yeah.
that. Absolutely love that.
I think Gary Vaynerchuk says it. I can't remember if I quote it in my book. I think I do. The book that's not the titleless book that's still not published, but that one. We talk about Gary Vaynerchuk. Gary Vaynerchuk says, you know, when people ask the ROI of this, you know, ask them, what is the ROI of your mother? Because it's the same thing. It's like you just cannot put a price on this or a value to it, but you gotta nurture this and care about your people, because the results will be there. Absolutely, it's quite an
So,
interesting. The ROI of your mother. Watch him on YouTube. He's quite funny when he says it.
listen, sometimes you've just got to do the right thing,
Totally.
right? That's what we have to, it's all a mix. It's not always, and I'll get shot down for this, I'm sure. It's not always about the ROI. Certainly not always about the immediate ROI. There are connections to these things, right?
Yeah.
I mean, people say, "Oh, yeah, culture's great. What's the?" Listen, if you just took your turnover of employees figure and multiplied that by the cost of rehiring, retraining, all that kind of stuff, and took 10% off of that, right? There's numbers, there's hard numbers for you there if you ever focus on engagement and retention. And I'll tell you, it'd be more than 10% anyway, right?
Absolutely.
So if you want to work out ROIs, you can work out ROIs. I think the thing is, you've got to think this stuff is important enough to pursue it, you know, and you've got to continuously pursue it. I tried to put a mnemonic against this the other day because, I don't know, I had 5 minutes.
You were in a creative marketing zone for the moment. I love a good
I
mnemonic.
tell you what, I was probably trying to avoid doing something else, I suspect. But I wrote down, because I was asked this question again by this group. And by the way, that, you know, when I talked about that gung ho grid, they absolutely kicked off at that grid. Right, it was an interesting conversation. How can you deliver that? And that's another episode.
A kick-off moment.
But I got it down to, and it's your word, fun. But I got it down to the crack. Right, great
As in the
culture is
Irish
down
word.
to the crack. Yeah, the Irish one, the CRAIC, and I put it down to being committed,
love,
responsive, authentic, intentional, and continuous. I mean, if I take those 5 words, that to me is what culture's about, right? That's not bad, is it? It's all right.
I really like that. I think you should have a few more moments where you avoid doing some work and come up with that. Could be the next big model out there, Andy. I love
Clearly
that.
It will be, mate. Clearly it will be.
I think it'll do very well in
I think,
with our
you know,
Irish organisations.
Yeah, exactly. I do love a
They'll love
Guinness, so
it.
that's all great. But I think those things about you, culture and engagement, you have to, you do have to commit to it. Otherwise, if you do it piecemeal, you're going to get nothing. You have to be responsive, and by that I mean, once you've done it, it's not going to stay in place just like that. You have to kind
No,
of tack with it. You've got
keep
to kind
going.
of react to these things, right? You've got to be authentic. It's got to be true to you and what you're really, really about, and sound like you and feel like you. If it isn't, it's never going to work because it's going to bounce off people.
Yeah,
And I think I use the word intentional a lot nowadays because I think it's so important. It gives that drive, and everything you do should be about pursuing this goal, this feeling of what it feels to like to work here, or what people like us do things like this, depending who you're thinking about when it comes to culture, right? And
yeah.
then the last bit around being continuous is it's a never-ending game. It is a never-ending game. Just when you think you've got it, something's going to change, and you've got to keep at it. A bit like that exec table, one change, two changes, it's
Boom.
not the same. You've got to keep on it. So I think that's really important. I think the more that organisations focus on that stuff, the better we'll be.
Cracking the culture code. That's it, isn't it? It's but yours,
Oh,
but the
look at that,
spelling.
eh? What a combination, Joe.
We're on fire with our sparks of. We've had. You got to stick with it. That was a gem.
That is a keeper. That is an absolute keeper. I can't believe I haven't thought of that before.
Cracking the culture. I can't believe you haven't. Yeah, that's a bit disappointing, Andy. But anyway, that's fine. You
Yeah,
could
I've let you
definitely.
down there, love.
You've let me down. So let's go future. Let's go future. What do you see? What are your children going to be experiencing, Max and Megan, in the future? What are they going to experience? In a successful organisation, what will them organisations be doing, feeling like? What are we going to see?
I don't know. I'm going to take that in two parts, right? I'm going to focus on the individual. So what? Because I can't help myself, sort of injecting Megan and Max with this stuff, right? So I think from a
Yeah,
personal perspective, I'm a massive fan of Ikigai, right? The
yeah,
sort of Japanese art of
yeah,
meaning.
yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I'm forever telling them, because there's a bit of a penchant at the moment, people being told, just find a job you love. And I'm like, that is lovely, but that is not the future. Um, yes, find something that you love, 100%. But really, find something that you're good at, or you can get good at by working hard at it. Find
Yeah,
something that you're going to get paid for and is going to pay you what you want to be paid for. And then find something that makes a difference to the world, that the world needs, right?
yeah,
That's going to either bring some joy or some help or support, or
yeah,
what. Find something with a bit of purpose behind it. And I think I'm always trying to say to Megan, Max, find that, look for that, right? So I think from a personal perspective, that's what I want them to have success with.
yeah,
I think when
yeah.
it comes to organizational success, I have what I call my 6 steps to stickiness. I mean, we this is the podcast that keeps on giving, right? With all these
I
things.
think I need to. I've got my pen poised here. Go on. The 6 steps to stickiness.
Okay, here we go. So we're
Go
thinking
for it.
again with stickers. We're talking about retention and engagement of people,
Yeah,
right? Having a place where people want to be, where they love to be, where they thrive, and all that. So I've broken it down into 6 steps, and I genuinely think these can be applied at an organizational level or an individual level, right? Doesn't matter if you're a team of 5 or a team of 50,000, whatever it is. I
yeah,
think these still apply.
yeah,
So the first step is to create and tell your engaging future story, right?
yeah,
So discover, align, articulate that purpose, vision, mission, objectives, and strategy. And you've got a line running all through those things, right? And build a story that tells where you're headed. Humans
yeah,
love a bit of certainty,
yeah,
right? Where's this business going? Why am I here? And
yeah,
importantly, tell it in such a way that it equips and empowers others to tell that story. Okay.
yeah,
Really, really importantly, at the center of that story, any employee has to be able to see themselves in it.
yeah,
They've got to relate to it. It's got to say something to them, right? And I think a really important thing when you get up and you do tell your story and you're intentionally telling this story is to find out very quickly before you release it, so test it, on where the fag paper gaps are in people's interpretation of what you're saying. Because if you don't understand where those little tiny nuances in interpretation are, those fag paper gaps become chasms. And a really good exercise for doing that, because often when you start these sort of things, it's normally the CEO's got to go up and tell the story. So what you do is you get a team of trusted people around him and you get him to tell the story. And he tells a story, and then you say, thank you very much, and you kick the CEO out of the room, right? Now, let's be honest. That in itself is just a wonderful thing to be able to do, just to powerfully kick a CEO out of the room. But when you're then in the room with everybody else, you ask them what they've heard. And you talk about what you've heard. And immediately you're going to hear the little nuances in interpretation, right? Now, what that allows you to do is discuss those and bring the CEO back and ask questions back of the CEO. Is this what you intended? Is it what you intended? Is this what you mean? And that allows that story to be refined and better understood. And then you can go and release it to the world. Because I'm sure we've all been in scenarios, I remember many, where, you know, a leader of the business gets up in it's usually a big conference and gets up. And I remember one in pubs, you know, in the auditorium, I think the room was almost split, half operator, half central, right? Central support. And the message was, you are the CEOs of your own business. And if you slowed time down, you'd have seen the operators punching the air with, yes, we are the CEOs. And the central support teams putting their head in their hands. Because the interpretation of that message was not what was intended. The interpretation ended up being, well, I can do what I like in my business. I can have what stock I like. I don't have to do those promotions if I don't want to. I'll have my own menu. And the reality was, I just would like you to take full responsibility for your P&L, please.
And achieve the numbers quick.
You're laughing because you know what happened. How long did it take us to unpick that mess?
I was on both sides of those fence. Having been an operator, I wanted to be the CEO of my own area, and then went to central functions supporting, going, whoa, it's carnage out there, in a good way. Yes.
Oh, well, there you go. And how long did it take to unpick? A nightmare. So look, it's really important to have that story. It's really important to road test it, but then tell it in such a way that people can see themselves in it and can go on and tell that story. That's how stories get circulated. So that's the first step, right? And actually, beautifully, in a leadership development program I was facilitating the other day, a single unit pub manager who's just won a massive award in his company talked passionately about how he had achieved his goals with his team because he set out a very clear vision for his pub. So you're never too small for this stuff, right? Single unit pub guy saying this is the vision, right? Because that's how everybody understood what we were trying to do, and everything else flew behind it. It's not about having to be big business all the time. A single pub, you know, performed incredibly by setting a vision and telling a story. The second thing is, and this is a definite kind of thing for me, is match the cultural promise up to the reality. You know, do not false advertise your culture, right? It's a retention and customer disaster waiting to happen, right? Anybody heard of Brewdog? You know, I mean,
haven't we just?
This is it. When you put these things up and say this is what it's like to work here, you're going to attract people who want some of that. If they turn up and see that it's nothing like that, you are not going to keep them for long, right? It's also going to breed some divisive. Well, it's going to build a feeling of divisiveness within the business that when we say something, we don't really mean it because it's not what really happens here, and no one pays attention to or reacts to any of the things that you're trying to do, right? So minimize the say-do gap, okay? The best example I can have with this stuff, because I talk a lot about culture and values being taken from the mural to the mindset, okay?
Love
and
that.
If you think about the company Enron, right? Enron had in their big head office, in their reception area, carved into marble their values. One of which was right in the center, integrity. Now, anybody who knows the Enron story knows it's like the biggest corporate fraud ever, right? Massive fraud, hugely endemic in the business, massive scale, and yet in stone in their reception is the word integrity, right? There is no point having values in your business if they have no purchase on reality. I would rather a business doesn't have values and just operates, because I think if you have values and then you do something different, it's more divisive than not having them at all. So match the culture promise up to the reality.
Yep.
What you show is important will become important, right?
Yeah.
The third step is equip your leaders and managers to engage. And that sounds blinking obvious, but it's common sense, but not common practice, right? I think it is really trying to train in those human skills, really understanding what it takes to manage for trust. And you can manage for trust. You look at any of the work by someone like Paul Zak, the American neuroscientist, and his oxytocin work, right?
Yeah, totally.
There are practical, tangible ways to help people manage for trust.
Yeah.
The scariest thing is that out of his list of 8 practical things that you can do, the 2 lowest scoring things I think are the most ridiculously easy ones out of all of them. Number 1, recognize excellence. And number 2, share information more broadly, right? 2 simple things that you can do to help build trust between you and your teams. But how often do you allow time for your managers to think that? How often do you educate people on these human skills and how to engage and how to manage and how to give focus and how to give stretch and how to deal with conflict and how to care deeply and challenge directly? All these things, right? Equip leaders and managers to engage, right? I think that's incredibly important. The fourth one is to listen and, importantly, act on the employee voice.
Yeah.
So I think in great cultures, in high-performing teams, people genuinely feel like they've got a voice. They've got a voice to contribute, to challenge, to query, without any fear of retribution, right? This is not all about an annual survey recording how someone feels, although those things done well can add a really interesting backdrop, but it's the start of a conversation.
Yeah.
I think the saddest thing I see when I do survey work with businesses, and I think this affects, someone told me the other day, a statistician told me something like 90% of businesses who do engagement surveys, line managers never, ever have an action plan on what to do with the results.
Wow.
I mean, that's a ridiculous stat, right?
Yeah.
And I think listening and acting is really important. It's easy to act on stuff that aligns to things you're already going to do. Oh, yeah, we're going to do that. Here we go. Brilliant. It's much harder to go back to say to somebody, thank you for your thoughts. We're not going to do that right now, and here's why. But that's seeing that person. That's listening to that person. That's showing that, thank you for contributing, but let's have a chat about it. And you might think, oh, on a big business scale, that's impossible. It's not impossible, because amazing businesses do it every day. They just have different mechanics to do it, right?
Yeah.
But I think it is about listening and learning and acting and having a conversation, right? It is a conversation after all. It is not one long monologue, right? You must see that, Jo, in all of the coaching work that you do, all the things you aspire to get people to do around having great conversations, right?
Yeah.
It's not one person saying stuff. It's 2-way, 3-way, 4-way conversations that are happening, right?
Multiple conversations all the time. And it is absolutely that. One of our biggest fans actually at Coaching Culture talks about listening with intent. Which is exactly what you're talking about, listening and acting on it, listening with intent. So yeah, and it is all about the multiple conversations. I often talk about it's like being a conductor of an orchestra. You know, things are kind of, the music's playing sweetly over there, and then you look over there and go, whoa, somebody's just about to crash the cymbals out of tune here. Let's go look over there. But it's constant conversations, constant and constant moving forward.
It has to be, because the vast majority of your employees, something like 67%, are present, right? They're there. They give you your time, but that's the limit. They don't give you their best ideas or best effort, because sadly, they've never been asked in the majority of cases, right?
Yeah.
So I think this employee voice thing is really important. It's about setting up the mechanics and the listening devices and the forums to have chats, but it's also about intentionally taking action with what comes out of those things, right?
Yeah.
Don't let anybody listening to this podcast ever let an engagement survey come through, and the big thing that everybody talks about is the number. That's a tiny thing, right?
Yeah.
Let's talk about what we're going to do. Let's talk about where we've improved. Let's talk about where we've still got to improve. Let's act on the things that people are saying, and let's be tough enough to go back and say thank you for that, but we're not going to do that, and here's why. I think that's really, really important.
I love these.
The penultimate bit, I'm a marketing guy, so there's bound to be a communication thing in here, is wrap it up in engaging communication, right? And I think lots of people think communications in a business have to cascade down from the CEO, and I would much prefer them to percolate up from the employees. And I think I often describe communication, what I see, and I've been guilty of it in the past, as some sort of just tsunami of messages coming down from the business, completely unrelated, uncoordinated, just this tsunami, this massive wave of communication. Tsunamis aren't good things, right?
No.
They kill people, right?
Yeah.
And the number one issue in business is often communication.
Yeah.
But for me, this comes back to what the whole purpose of having vision, values, purpose, strategy is, that you can align all of your messages in a business to these things. So actually, all of that communication should really be about updating progress, where we've got to, who's doing amazing things, catching the stars and telling the stories and encouraging other people to tell the stories and refresh and recapture and accentuate and highlight all the brilliant things that are getting you to places, but also hold up your hand to where we perhaps have fallen short and where we need to double down effort.
Yeah,
but because it's all linked to the vision and the mission and the strategy, it's sensical. It's all related. It's all relevant. And very often it just feels like a complete scattergun, and which one's important and what means what, and just have a bit of it. Again, this word keeps cropping up, intentionality behind your communication, right?
Yeah, I love that.
And then my final one, which is my most recent addition, is something I've talked about in relation to these things, but I've never given it its own step before. But today it's getting its own step. And step 6 is find your first followers, right? Now, no leader does it all by themselves. You've got to build momentum with culture change. And I think one of the things that puts a lot of people off is when they think about the landscape of their people, they're immediately drawn to those kind of negative mood hoovers that it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of effort to turn these guys around. And I'm kind of like, forget about them. When you're trying to create momentum, like any good marketer knows, you've got that curve to go through, right? Go where the sunshine is. There are people in your organization desperate, waiting for this stuff, that will act as your Batman, your champions. They'll do things that you would never have thought of. They will create more ripples than you're capable of making on your own.
Yeah.
Go find these people. Help them to understand what you're trying to do. Get them to help build the momentum. And then before you know it, you're creating that bow wave of momentum. And then the people at the far end who are being negative have an option to either swim and survive or drown and go, right? Go where the energy is. It's a really famous video, I think, on YouTube called Leadership Lessons of the Dancing Man. I don't know if you've seen that video.
Seen it? You mean the one who's having a crazy time? Is it the one at the crazy time at the festival? Of course I've seen it. I love it.
That is one of the greatest videos on YouTube, right, when it comes to this sort of stuff. And they talk about first followers, and that momentum thing is so important. So for me, that's my final step. Step 6, after all those things, find your first followers, mate. And to me, those are the 6 steps to stickiness. And I think if organizations could do even basic stuff in any of those 6 steps, you're going to move forward.
Absolutely. There's a book in there, Andy. There is a book, Professor Andy Mercurio. I think 6 Steps to Stickiness is a book.
There will be at some stage.
In the making.
Yeah, at some stage, I've got to make that happen. I've got to make that happen, along with my Sticky 16, which is the. There's just too much stickiness everywhere, but there is 16 questions that can help you get a handle on perhaps where you're great and maybe not so great on the culture in your business. And it's something that you ask, just 16 questions across the organization to get a temperature check on what we're good at and what we're not good. And what's really interesting when you do that is when you cut it by, I guess, leadership or
Yeah.
cohort. So what the
Yeah.
exec think, what the line managers think, and what the employees think, it's
Individuals.
really
Yeah.
interesting sometimes to kind of see the nuances and differences there. But look,
You have
I
absolutely
absolutely
thrown
love this
so
stuff.
much you've thrown so much our way today, Andy. If I mean so much, you've literally, I feel like you've emptied your pockets of Bizjuicer and the podcast sticky from the inside kind of throughout all of this, which is just amazing things that you share all the time. There's so many. I mean, I've been writing so many notes. But if there was just one thing, so we've had so many today, so many nuggets. If there was one thing, what would the smallest thing that people could go away and think about tomorrow that is going to make that impact tomorrow? That they could just go, you know what, actually, this all sounds great, but actually, what is the one thing that they could need to go and do straight away that would have a larger impact?
This is going to sound incredibly simple of everything we've talked about, and I would ask people to go beyond their first reaction, because I suspect when I say this, people go, "Yeah, I do that already." And I think the sad reality is, someone said to me today, it's a bit like sex and comedy, two things you think you're better at than you actually are, right? And I'm going to say, be generous and intentional with your praise. And I think it's so easy in the times we are in to focus on all the things that are wrong or need changing or need doing. And often the simple act of giving genuine praise and thanks and seeing someone's effort and showing how you value them is often overlooked. And I think if you can do this stuff in public with authenticity, with peers around, and it's a surprise, it comes with even more impact. So it's something as simple as that, but do not underestimate the difference that can make to an individual if you can just be really intentional and generous with your praise.
Oh, Andy, what a warm thing to leave us on today. That is absolutely, everything you've said has just made my heart sing. You absolutely have. And I totally agree. Praise and thanking people for what they do, the difference, because they don't have to, they've got choices, they can go anywhere. To actually thank people for the contribution they make. I genuinely, I've learned so much owning a business versus being an employee in a business, and the level, I've always cared for my teams because I do, but the level of care I now have for my own employees and teams, it's like something I've never experienced to that level before. um, and everything that you're saying totally resonates with me because now leading my own business rather than a team within somebody else's business, it's just amplified to such a greater proportion, wanting to, we exist to make work better, but for me it's also about making coaching culture the right place as well, and that is so important. So I absolutely get it. So I've picked up so many fabulous things today from you. Thank you. How can I give you generous and intentional praise and thanks, Andy? Because you've been amazing as always. You're always, I could listen and talk
Hey,
to you all
listen,
day, every week.
making the time for
Oh,
this conversation is generous enough. You're an incredibly busy lady with huge responsibility, right? And actually, this isn't meant to be a love-in, but I think the work you're trying to do, right? And I say trying not in a negative way, but because it's a constant, right? Trying to
yeah,
get
yeah,
people to
totally.
have better conversations about self-improvement that actually still has a very strong business benefit at the end of it,
Yeah,
right? Because if
yeah,
we're all showing up and being at our best, everybody benefits. I think the more we take that coaching attitude and less tell and more curious and supporting discovery, then I think the future's very, very, very bright. And a bit like with stuff we've talked about today, it's all connected, right? And
yeah,
it is very much of the moment. These things aren't new. They've been there for a long time. But actually, now's the time to pick them up and really intentionally do something with all of this stuff. So I commend you for all that work you're doing.
Oh, thank you, Andy. It's great. It's amazing and challenging, all wrapped up in the same sort of on the same sort of weighing scales. But it's phenomenal. How can people get in contact with you when they want to, when they listen to this and think, "Crikey, we've got to meet this person"?
Well, you could you could get me on very juicy ways of communication. I mean, you can link in with me on LinkedIn. I'm Andy Goram. I've got stars and magnets around my names because clearly I just want to attract people. It's about retention.
Such a marketer.
You can get hold of me at I know, more overthought things. You can get me on Andy at bizjuicer.com. I'd love people to listen to the Sticky from the Inside podcast.
Yes.
Those are the main places to kind of try and find me. And if anybody wants to continue this conversation, please do.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you so much, Andy, for your time today. And it's genuinely been an absolute delight. We've at last got this in the diary. It's been an absolute joy. Like I said, I could listen to your stories all day, every day. I'm not going to do my usual coaching, repeating back of them all because there was just too many. But there was some starting with Betty and Rosemary, moving on to Gala Bingo, moving on to the culture killer conversation. There's all sorts of nuggets in there. So we'll put all the notes out there, and more people will listen to this because there's a lot in there, which is great. So thank you, Andy, as always.
My pleasure, Jo, and thanks for being so generous with your time. Really appreciate you having me on.
Oh, thank you. And again, if people want to listen to more of our Coaching Culture podcast for more fabulous guests like Andy, please do tune in. So thank you.